This video deals with the production possibilities curve in AP macroeconomics. So a couple things we want to talk about. Usually when you do a production possibilities curve in this class, it's going to be an increasing opportunity cost curve if it represents an individual country. You have to make sure when you draw it, if it's increasing opportunity cost, that the shape of the curve is convex to the origin, or it bows out concave to the origin, so it bows out. And that represents, just by drawing that, you are showing with this shape, okay, you are showing that this is an increasing opportunity cost graph. The next thing you need to do is you need to make sure that you label your graphs. Some very famous graphs in economics tend to be like guns and butter, capital and consumer goods. If they do not tell you what the two goods are, okay, if they don't tell you it's apples and automobiles, then you need to make sure you throw some sort of a label on there. It could be good A, good B, capital consumer goods, guns, butter, anything really you think of. If they don't tell you what to put on there, should work. You can't label it like P and Q. I don't think you would get away with doing that, okay, because they'll assume you're labeling a supply and demand graph. Okay, so that's an increasing opportunity cost graph. This would be a constant opportunity cost graph, okay? And you can just tell by the shape of the line, so guns, butter. You can tell that this is constant opportunity cost because the line is straight. You can tell the one on the left is increasing opportunity cost because it's concave to the origin, okay? Anyway, as I was saying here, a couple of things that this can, the purpose of this graph really is a couple things. One, it can represent an economy as a whole. Okay, so you have guns and butter. And what you're saying here is if you're operating anywhere on this curve, anywhere on the line, this is a country that's at full employment and it's fully utilizing its resources. It doesn't matter if it's here at A, if it's here at B, or if it's here at C. You're at full employment, you're fully using your resources. You can tell because you're on your possibilities line. Does that mean unemployment is zero? No. Remember, full employment is roughly about 5% in this class, or you assume it to be. So therefore, if you're an economy that's experiencing full employment, so on, let's say a free response question, if they said, you know, macro land is at full employment, if you were going to draw a production possibilities curve to represent that, you would have to put macro land at a point that would be somewhere on the line, okay? Now, if you just think about what the different lines mean, the different lines or the different points show different trade-offs or different choices made by a society. In choice A, macro land in this case, let's just call this, okay, macro land, they are choosing to produce more guns and less butter. Now, as a society, if they say, you know what, we want more consumer goods, we want more civilian goods, if you will, well, in order to get more civilian goods, okay, this amount, they can't produce the same amount of guns, so they had to make a decision. That's a trade-off. The opportunity cost of gaining more butter in this case is the guns that they no longer can produce, and you can see that here. If they decide even further, you know what, we need even less military goods, well, what ends up happening is you must give up even more guns to get the increase in butter, or civilian goods in this case. Okay, so once again, anywhere on the line represents full employment. It just represents different choices. So if they tell you on the AP exam, macro land produces two goods, now as a result of a change in consumer sentiment, they decide to produce more civilian goods and less military goods. What they're really just asking you to do is to draw this going to the right and indicating that you are moving along the curve to the right. Okay? Different scenario that this can represent. Okay, here we are again, guns and butter. Here's my graph. If they say an economy is experiencing a recession or a depression or is operating at an unemployment rate beyond its full employment rate or above its natural rate of employment, what that's telling you that it's not on the line anymore. It's now operating at a point inside the curve. So if you draw a point inside the curve, you are representing an economy as a whole, and let's say this is Macroland's economy again. So if I draw this, I am telling you that this economy is experiencing a recession. Okay, so if you just think about it in terms of the aggregate demand, aggregate supply graph, okay, another way to represent the whole economy is this graph. You would be intersecting here below full employment. Okay, so this is right. So these two graphs essentially are representing the same thing. Okay, and once again, it doesn't necessarily matter where your choices are. I mean, if they tell you that a country's choosing more guns than butter, well, then you have to represent that, but they usually don't do that. Okay, so that is a point beyond. Point B is in theory unattainable, but I kind of refer to it as it's unattainable slash unsustainable. It's almost like sprinting, where if you view this line here as like, you know, the planet, you can jump off the planet temporarily, but you can't live there. You can't sustain it. You're pushing yourself too far. To use an analogy maybe that you might run into in college, you know, you can pull an all-nighter once or twice. You can't pull an all-nighter every night. Your body would just cease to function. And the same thing here with the economy, kind of taking us over here. So if this is point A, this would be like point B in an economy. Okay, you're beyond your full employment. You're going to experience some inflation. You can't sustain it out there unless there's advances in technology or resources or those type of things that allow you to exist out there. So if you're operating beyond this point and nothing changes, ceteris paribus, at some point there's going to be inflation and you will have to come back to this line. You just can't continue to produce out there and sustain it. Okay? Okay, next thing. This line or this graph, sorry here, can also shift. And that is really the goal of all economies. If you think about the history of the United States, our production possibilities curve was here, let's say in the 1700s, and it continued to increase outward. Then that's the 1800s, as we progressed through the 1800s, and industrialization, and the development of the car and the automobile, the advancing of the internet, computer systems, different forms of energy, okay, continues to shift these curves out. And this shifting of this graph represents economic growth. Okay, that is the goal of all economies, is to continue to increase their production possibilities curve. Okay, and why do they want to do that? Because as you increase the curve and you're growing, that means you are allowing, okay, if we just pick a couple different colors, okay, they could have this much guns and this much butter, or this amount of goods and this amount of services here. Now if you're out here and you're on the curve, well, you can have more of both things. And if you think about it, that is the way our country is. You can now have more of everything than somebody could have had in the 1700s or the 1800s due to economic growth. Okay? Now what causes the shift of the curve? What causes this curve to shift outward? Or what causes economic growth? Okay, a couple things. It could be a increase or a change in natural resources. Okay, maybe you discovered phenomenal oil reserves or natural gas reserves like we sort of have in the United States in the last couple of years. That could lead to a potential eventual shift out to the right. If you think about Alaska, it was bought for 2 cents an acre. Seward's Folly, it was kind of made fun of. Alaska has paid for itself over and over because of the oil reserves that were found in Alaska. Okay, it turned out to be a very cheap buy. A big one is a change, and usually that means a progressive change in technology. If you think about farming in this country, less people farm every year. Every year we produce more food. How is that possible? It's due to the increase in technology. Okay, farmers today can use equipment and plants and tractors and machines to harvest and plant more crops than anyone ever could have imagined in the 1700s. And if you would have told people in the 1700s the amount of farmers we have and the amount of people we have in this country, they would have assumed everyone is starving to death. Okay? But changing technology really is a huge driver of economic growth. In the late 90s, during the 90s, you saw massive economic growth, a lot of that was driven by the development and the widespread beginning use of the internet. If you think about going to the grocery store, as a kid, I can remember going to the grocery store, and they would have to type in the price of each good and give you up a total. Now they just scan the food through. And if you just think about how much faster it is to check out due to technology and machines, okay? The way your grades are recorded. You guys can check and have access to your grades almost on a daily basis. You go on Edline, you can check your grades. When I was in high school, that was an impossibility. It was almost like you would have to go to the teacher. It was just a lot less efficient. So all of these changes in technology lead to increases in economic growth. Okay. Another one would be a change in human resources or human capital. Okay, both in terms of the number of people. Okay, so immigration for the United States was a great boost to economic growth. You had a lot of cheap labor showing up willing to work. Okay, but also in the quality of the workers. Okay, as your workforce becomes more advanced. And this, you might remember this from the Naked Economics reading we did on this. Okay, as you get more productive workers, higher skilled workers, they can produce more, and as they're producing more, society as a whole can produce more, and that shifts the production possibilities curve out. The other thing that can cause this to happen would be a focus on capital goods could also lead to a shift outward. So if you kind of just look at this original graph here, capital and consumer, as a country focuses, let's say, at point A as opposed to point B, well, the development of capital goods leads to things like new computers, new assembly lines, more factories, more equipment. That can also cause the production possibilities curve to eventually shift out to the right. Okay, a focus or an emphasis on capital goods over consumer goods in the long run. But the ones that you have up there on the board are the big ones. Natural resources, changing and increasing natural resources or resources in general, changing technology, changing human resources, the number and the quality. Kind of give you a natural resource example. Many people would argue that Japan in the 1930s leading up to World War II, essentially what they were trying to do was increase their production possibilities curve by getting access to natural resources that they did not have at home. Okay, I think most of you are familiar with this. Japan is a series of islands, and it tends not to have a lot of natural resources that are kind of present on the actual islands themselves. So they had to go looking for them somewhere else. Okay, and so really a lot of, if you look at your history, you can look at a lot of invasions and a lot of different wars really as almost a war over natural resources. Now, what's the point of that? It's not just having the resources, it's what the resources allow you and your society to do. Okay, last thing here. Okay, what can cause the whole curve to shift in? Well, the whole curve to shift in, remember, a point inside is a recession. Your potential hasn't changed, you're just not living up to your full potential. A shift of the curve means your full potential has changed. You are no longer capable of doing this. So it needs to be something pretty catastrophic or pretty extreme. Usually it would be something like the Black Death would have caused this in Europe. 1/3 of the population died. That would cause the whole curve to shift in. That's not 1/3 of the people not working, like the Great Depression where unemployment got up to 25%. The potential was still there. The people wanted to work. The factories were there. It just wasn't operating. This is the people are dead. They're no longer around. The number of workers has declined. A computer virus literally wiping out, Skynet from Terminator, taking over all the computer systems and shutting them down. If we no longer could use the computers, if we couldn't fix it, they couldn't come back online, that would cause this whole curve to shift inward massively. Okay, if you just ran out of resources, all of a sudden there's just nothing left. It's just, there's no oil anywhere in the world. That would cause, at least in the short run, until an alternative was developed, a collapse of the production possibility curves for many countries. Okay, that would cause the whole thing to shift in. Okay, so remember, a shift in is different than a point in. A point in means your potential hasn't changed. You're just having a bad day, or as a country you're going through a tough time, but your potential's still there. A shift in means your overall potential has changed. So the analogy I sometimes used to use in class, imagine if you're a runner and you can run a 5-minute mile. If you're not feeling well in the morning and you run a 6-minute mile, you're at a point inside your potential. You just didn't live up to your potential. The next day you might be able to go out and run your 5-minute mile. On the other hand, if you, let's say, had an accident and you now walk with a limp or run with a limp, maybe your whole curve shifted in. Your potential, you can still do your best, but you can't do 5 minutes anymore. Kind of a weird example, perhaps, and a little cryptic. I apologize for that. So I hope this kind of deals with all the issues related to the production possibilities curve.